adjourn. Senator Singh.
Madam Deputy President, I rise tonight to recognise that this is Refugee Week, a week to celebrate the contribution refugees have made and continue to make to the social and economic fabric of Australia. But it is also a week to highlight the unfair and cruel policies this government is imposing on asylum seekers living in Australia by cutting the income support that they receive. But before I do that, I would like to acknowledge the death of another young asylum seeker last week. His name was Fariborz Karami. He killed himself inside the Australian-run Regional Processing Centre on Nauru. He was 26 years old. His wife and his mother are now in hospital. His young brother has been taken into the care of the centre's authorities. Fariborz was a Kurdish refugee from Iran who had been severely traumatised in the country he fled and then locked up on Nauru for 5 years by the Australian government. He had served several mental health issues and had been crying out for help for years. Fariborz, though, was the third asylum seeker to take his own life in the last 12 months. He died just 3 weeks after the tragic loss of life of a young Rohingya man on Manus Island. In total, 12 refugees have died under tragic circumstances from injuries or illness sustained in Australia's offshore detention centres. I want to pass my thoughts and condolences with the family members of those asylum seekers who have died. This tragic loss of life of asylum seekers highlights the dire need for care and assistance for these vulnerable people to prevent further harm and tragedy. So I urge the Turnbull government to provide such support, as is their duty of care to do so. This is a human tragedy. It is a tragedy that I believe is worthy of inquiry, to investigate the human rights abuses of people who sought our protection and the ongoing unmet medical needs for those who remain in indefinite detention. It saddens me that this has happened under our watch, that we have not prevented this from happening, that these human beings weren't given the protections and opportunities that any humane country would offer them to rebuild their lives. So this is Refugee Week. If nothing else, it's an opportunity for refugees to be listened to be valued, to be seen. It is a week to recognise the risks to life for those families who cross borders fleeing persecution and seeking protection. It is a week to recognise that 1,369 people are still in detention in Australia. 225, including 22 children, are detained on Nauru, and over 500 are forsaken in Manus Island. I've heard stories of people moved pointlessly from one detention centre to another, of families being split up, of heartless treatment in detention of all varieties, causing even more trauma to their lives. But it doesn't stop there. For those asylum seekers in our Australian community who have been waiting for 5 or 6 years for the coalition government to decide about their refugee claims, their situation got a whole lot worse. Minister Dutton's Department of Home Affairs has started removing the last lifeline from thousands of these people by changing the eligibility rules for its Status Resolution Support Service program, SRSS. Potentially over 13,000 people, of whom over 4,000 are children, are living on the edge of disaster, at risk of losing the financial support they need while their claims are being processed. Because their refugee claims are undecided by government, these people find it extremely difficult to find work. Employers, unfortunately, are not lining up to give a job to someone with no Australian work experience or networks, who is on a short-term bridging visa and who has never been given help to learn English. These people have one option keeping them from utter destitution. The Status Resolution Support Service program provides an extremely basic allowance for people who would not be able to survive while their refugee claims are being considered. Their allowance gives a single person less than $35 a day and is well below the 2016 poverty line. It is 89% of New Start allowance and provides access to torture trauma counselling. But now the Home Affairs Department has made it clear that if it decides someone is work-ready, then they will lose their SRSS payment, even if that person can't actually get a job or have significant mental and physical health issues or are carers of young children. And during recent Senate estimates, a Home Affairs official admitted to me that someone who's still waiting for their refugee assessment to be completed and is on the SRSS payment cannot study full-time in Australia, despite having arrived as a minor, having gone through high school and entered university with good grades. This is what has happened to Sarah Vanaz. Sarah Vanaz has been on a bridging visa and has a scholarship for full-time university. And she said, how do people expect someone to arrive in this country who doesn't have access to the services, who is stressing from the trauma they've been through and is an applicant who hasn't been processed and doesn't have skills to work with and whose education history isn't accepted, how do they find work? But their SRSS payment is now being withdrawn because the government has decided that they should not be studying full-time, even if they are studying English to improve their chances of getting a job. They should just get a job, even though there may be no job that they can get, and even though they may have got a scholarship to go to university. I mean, this just beggars belief from this government. They are some of the most vulnerable people in Australia who are trying to rebuild their lives. Instead, the Turnbull government wants to cut off their financial support, somehow thinking that it's going to help them. Remember, most of these people came to Australia, are genuine refugees with skills, motivated to contribute to Australia and lead a safe life in a welcoming country. But they were detained for months, some for years, and were not allowed to work. Nada and her husband and daughter have been here for 6 years and lost their SRSS payment in February. And Nada said, "We still don't have a future for my daughter. I didn't feel safe in my country because of problems with the government, but I feel shame that I brought her here and we spent 2.5 years in detention." Pregnant women, families with young children, survivors of torture who are not vulnerable enough according to the new, much stricter criteria will be stripped of any form of income. This is not only cruel, it is so short-sighted. But according to Minister Dutton, the blame lies on these desperate people themselves. His department points to the length of time these people have been in Australia on the SRSS payment without getting a job, but never acknowledges that the primary reason they can't get a job is because the government has delayed their refugee applications. At the very saddest and hardest part of their lives, people who have sought our protection will lose their only source of income, as meagre as that is. And then what will happen? The charities they rely on are already overstretched. There is also clearly a callous money grab here by the government that simply does not care about vulnerable people in our community. In the coming months, the proposed changes are likely to make thousands more vulnerable people in our communities homeless, destitute and desperate. Desperation, we know, leads to increased crime and poverty. But it does not have to be this way. We should be working on a compassionate approach to asylum seekers. We should be working on a lasting regional solution which would humanely address the plight of asylum seekers, redirecting funding to areas where it would achieve positive results, to UNHCR refugee camps, to peace negotiations, to foreign aid, to engagement with Indonesia and Malaysia, to establish lasting refugee resettlement in the region, to increasing our refugee intake. That is what this Turnbull government has failed to do and is what a Labor government will do. Because we recognise that Australia is a nation built on migration and we must respect and recognise refugees who have gone on to make invaluable contributions to our society and celebrate the rich and diversity that refugees now call home to us in Australia. So finally, on this Refugee Week, I would like to recognise on behalf of the Senate all of the dedicated men and women in our community from all walks of life who work to support and welcome refugees.
Thank you,
Thank
Senator
you for
Singh.
all
Your
of your
time has
efforts.